Hello, Dash. This is Kevin McKernan from Medicinal Genomics. We were recipients, a lucky recipient of some Dash funds back in January for building a cannabis genomic blockchain. And so since then, we've had some interesting dialogues on Discord and a few other places suggesting we should expand this a little bit more. And so this got us thinking as to what can we do to catapult Dash into the cannabis industry that would make them more than just a currency or more than just, let's say, a sponsor for a conference in the field. What can we do to really change the dynamics here? And so this idea came to mind, and I think it has a very big impact, and Dash should take a serious consideration at this. So take a look at this. Three goals of this pre-proposal. First and foremost, let's make the best cannabis genome sequence there is. There are some references out there. We're some of the first people to ever put some public. But back in 2011, the technology we had at the time couldn't really sequence that genome. We got into 100,000 pieces, and with some of the technology that's evolved 7 years later, this can perhaps be radically improved. There have been several attempts in the last many years for people trying to improve the reference. There hasn't been a whole lot of success. That's primarily due to the read length issues we're having with sequencers in the field, and those have very recently been addressed, making this imminent. Someone's going to do this eventually. Just a question of who's going to get there first, and how are they going to go and do it? Are they going to do it in a way that significantly changes the message of it having already been done in 2011? If they just redo it and republish it, I don't think it's going to get that many eyeballs. I think doing it in the manner that we're going to do it, I hope will showcase that it will actually intersect many different fields to pay attention to it. So let's make the best cannabis reference we can make. Let's sequence a genome that is the center point of a controversy. Okay, there are now cannabis patents that are emerging, and these cannabis patents are extraordinarily broad. The sequencing that we did in 2011 arguably held off people getting patents on THC strains. There's also some hemp strains that were put out then, but people have since come in and patented type 2 plants. Type 2 plants are plants that make both CBD and THC, and they're arguably the most medicinal plants out there, and one group has captured patents on all of them. And so this has been quite disturbing to the field. The field's paying a lot of attention to it because many people believe those plants were actually the natural genetic state of the plant. The Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, if you will, was for the plant to make both. It's only due to prohibition that we bred it to make high THC at the expense of less CBD. And that's a recent artifact. If anything, the type 1s should be more patentable, which are the ones that make only THC, than the type 2s, because the type 2s are what we anticipate are actually in nature, was more the natural state of the plant. So anyway, those patents emerged. What can we do about that? Well, we could sequence the genome of a type 2 plant and put it public for everybody. That way people who do have strains that pre-exist this 2013 patent application, they could compare it to this reference and demonstrate that, hey, I have proof that my strain existed back then and it matches this type 2 genome that was put public. I therefore have prior art, and they can begin to reduce the validity and the scope of some of those claims that are currently issued. So type 2 plants are very important, and the cannabis patents that are emerging are the whole reason why we run Cannapedia in the first place, because this allows people to get timestamps as to when their strains existed, and this helps people defend against patent trolls. So do take a look at our last Dash proposal. We'll link it in this pre-proposal, but it was effectively to get that Cannapedia, which is a cannabis notarization system, moved over to notarizing on the Dash blockchain, and that has been a success. It's working right now, and many strains are up there. The other part of it was to get Dash exposure at CanMed. And I think this is a way, and sequencing this genome would get Dash a much bigger exposure at CanMed than just a lead sponsorship role. It would demonstrate that they're actually really altering the landscape of the research field. And in terms of altering the landscape of the research field, while we're at it, we might as well run a crypto bounty peer review. And the reason for this is that peer review is broken. And we're going to go into why it's broken and how Dash and Dash Drive have the potential to actually change peer review and become a backbone for timestamping many peer review protocols. This has very big social and scientific implications. The peer review system right now is largely anonymous, and some journals have have reviewers that are open. But we're going to go into why that's such a big deal and why we believe if we were to do this project, it really should be made as an open source genome with attribution to the people that funded it, like Dash. It should be done through a crypto bounty peer review, just to stay true to the nature of crypto, bringing in trust and the proper incentive models. And while we're at it, we should address what we think are social injustices that are going on in terms of misuse of the patent system. All of those would help focus Dash as this beacon of bringing truth to very controversial fields. Okay, so 100x better reference. What do we mean by this? Back in 2011, we put a genome called ChemDog public, and you can see it right here in John Page's publication. In October, he published a paper comparing the data we put public to a bunch of other strains, 2 hemp strains and 1 purple kush. And his reference was not much better than ours. I mean, all of them ended up as a limitation of Illumina technology. They ended up in 100,000 pieces or more. His paper was much more thorough than we put public. He did nice RNA comparisons with all of these and compared hemp and cannabis. And it's a beautiful paper. And as you can see, it's been referenced many, many times and has one of the higher altimetric scores you can find. So people care about cannabis genomics, and any advancement made on top of this paper will be equally as referenced. It will be downloaded as frequently, and it will be the talk of the town in cannabis. And just to demonstrate this is what happened in 2011. We had Bloomberg weigh in when we sequenced this. We had Fast Company writing about it. We had Wired writing about it. Nature chimed in about it. Kind of funny article from Nature, actually. They compared us to Cheech and Chong. American Botanical Council, Boston.com, and of course NPR and the genomic space get into this. I mean, there's thousands of references to getting the cannabis genome initially drafted, and a draft is all it is at the moment. It's really not a complete finished genome, which is what we'd like this project to do. So why do it again? Well, this is kind of the mess that we have currently with the cannabis genome. And from 2011, it's really in 100,000 contigs. And despite some of the advances in DNA sequencing cost and infrastructure, this has not been improved upon by much in recent years. It's been 7 years. There's been a little bit of PacBio data that's been released into NCBI that have improved the contiguity quite a bit, but it's still missing like half the genome or a third of the genome. Like most genome estimates, we believe it's around over 800 megabases in size, which lines up with some of the cytological evidence and lines up with like a lot of the K-mer analysis. But when some of these newer, longer read technologies are getting used, they're only getting about 500 million bases. And so we're missing like 300 million bases of the genome off of those new techniques. And that's mainly just due to funding, I think. I think those folks were onto something using longer reads, but they just didn't have the gas to really do it right and to really throw enough DNA sequencing at it to make the whole genome come together. Where we want to go with this is ideally a picture of 20 chromosomes. Okay, so there's 10 chromosomes from your mother in a cannabis plant and 10 from the father in a cannabis plant. And then there's, of course, a mitochondria and a chloroplast. We probably won't get it down to exact 22 pieces because these telomeres and centromeres tend to break up quite a bit. Some of these repeats make it hard to sequence as well, but 1,000 contigs is within reach from what we can see based on other genomes that are this complex being done with a similar technology. And we have a very detailed plan on the technology. I won't bore you with in this, but it'll be in the proposal. But it's using a combination of these long-read tools and some chromatin cross-linking tools that have really done wonders on the plantain genome. Okay, so what's the second reason here? What's going on with these cannabis patents? Well, these are all over the news right now, that this looks like a major monopoly that's being formed. The interesting thing about cannabis patents is that they cannot be federally enforced until it's federally legalized. So these people are clearly capturing these patents, holding on to them for a legalization event. They're probably going to sell them or use them to rent-seek on people that are using type 2 strains. These 2 broad patents that issued in 2015 have since had continuations in part that have expanded them into even broader claims, and so they effectively have claims that anything that makes both THC and CBD. And everyone in the field is somewhat appalled by this because this is clearly the natural state of the plant. This was not hand-bred in the manner in which their initial patents suggested, where they were specifically breeding for low mercy, and that arguably may have been unique. I've heard mixed things on that, but the way the patents have been expanded, they are not unique, and they're basically a large rent-seeking operation on a new industry. And the reason the USPTO is making these mistakes is they don't know how to search for prior art in what is traditionally black markets. Not everyone was running around publishing their chemotypes and online. Some were, and they missed some of those. And so there is some prior art out there, but it's going to be probably an expensive fight. And one way to lower the cost for people to make that fight is to make a universal sequence reference of the plant that's in question. It's not the exact plant, but it's a type 2 plant that fits some of the claims. And to use it as a resource so people can compare their strains. If they can demonstrate they had timestamps from before the patent filing, yet the sequence matches the sequence that Dash and Medicinal Genomics puts forward, they can utilize that as a tool to perhaps reduce some of the egregious scope of those patents. So this can be a very I think this will be cheered on by everybody in the field because this is trying to bring more freedom to the cannabis field, and it's going to affect patients. There's more in this on Shango Los's Shaping Fire podcast. Reggie gives a great description of the complexity of the field here and various parties that are trying to mitigate this with various sequencing approaches. And so why should Dash care about this, right? This seems like a social justice problem. Why are we out sequencing and saving the cannabis industry? Well, Dash is spending millions to get into the cannabis industry because cannabis does have a banking problem. And I think they'll be successful getting in. But I think there are ways of spreading the name of Dash more effectively than perhaps YouTube ads, Facebook, Google, Twitter. All these people are banning crypto ads, and they don't like cannabis ads either. And so it's a double negative there. I don't think you're going to get a whole lot of traction reaching people there. And the people that you do reach there, I don't think are going to be the decision makers. I think if you want to get to the decision makers in the field, you fund what makes massive impact in the cannabis space. You do something like the cannabis genome, you put it public, you particularly do the one that's a controversy in the field, like these type 2 plants, and you do it in a way that is different. You do it with crypto peer reviews, because these peer reviews, as I'll show you, are going to be very critical going forward into the future. Cannabis, being as controversial it is, has some challenges in peer review. It's a difficult thing to get fully funded due to federal overhang. It's difficult to get the fees to actually pay for peer review if you're working in a university at all, because those universities may have federal funding and don't want to pay for those things. So there's a host of complications in getting cannabis science done correctly, and the crypto space can really change that. So anyway, we call this cultural marketing. Because you're actually tapping into something that's extraordinarily popular in the scientific community and in the general community, and you're also changing, rotating the chessboard in many ways, because you are no longer having to defend yourself as being a currency that's used for drugs and money laundering and all that. And you can say, no, we're used for building the scientific standards. We are used for helping out medicinal patients. We are used for not just currency, but we can be used as an arbiter of truth by using cryptography. And that's something none of the journals actually have. So I think it rotates the chessboard quite a bit, because you are solving the problems that the fiat system can't solve. They're too tangled up in their own politics to get anything done on this field. And when cryptocurrencies step in and solve the hard problems, it will make everyone in the field stop and take notice. So there's a variety of things going on at Dash, which we all commend. There's all 36 bringing in ATMs. There's conference rotations going on with Dash sponsorship. You're sponsoring the CanMed conference as well. But there's a big difference having a booth and having a sponsorship at a conference versus actually delivering something like a scientific shockwave to the industry. And that's what we see this project as being. So what is cultural marketing? Well, you can Google this. There's a variety of descriptions of it, but effectively it's tapping into things that are extraordinarily popular in the community, and you try to do it through several different vectors if you can. So we've seen that cannabis is more popular than all the presidents. Every presidential election, there's more people voting for weed than they're voting for presidents. All right, so this resonates with everybody. It's a $20 billion market today, expected to grow 35% per year. Then there's the genomics market. This is what's driving the whole personalized medicine revolution. People think it's a $20 billion market today, but there are economic reports that claim it has a $796 billion impact. They're a little bit Keynesian, but nevertheless, it does have a very large impact and a similar growth rate as the cannabis field. So these are the two other markets in America that are growing as fast as crypto. Maybe not as fast as crypto, but they're right in tight second place. Okay, so on to peer review. What's going on with peer review? Why are we doing a crypto peer review? This seems, a bit distractionary. Well, let's first look at what's going on with peer review, because science in our society is often used as almost like a priesthood. The news will try and make some claim of something going wrong, bring in a guy with a white lab coat or a lady with a white lab coat and say, see, here's an arbiter of trust, do what they say, global warming galore. There you go. But what's often not noticed is the ugly side of making that sausage, which is that the retraction rate in science is going up. And the retraction rate is inversely correlated with the impact level of the journal, which is quite shocking. The reason for retraction, as you can see from this paper here, is it's mostly compromised peer review, but then also there's some secondary levels there in terms of, I think, data unreliable was the second highest impact there. And then if you actually look at some of the work in these Nature papers, here's the impact factor of the journal. And as it goes up, the retracted index goes up. This is the rate at which papers are retracted divided by the number of papers the journal publishes, right? So it's worse for the better journals. And then you can also look at the number of retractions per 10,000 publications in the upper left, and it's actually skyrocketing upwards. Why is this? Well, there's a very simple reason why it is, and anyone in the crypto space will get this. It's incentives, okay? So this is effectively what goes on in peer review. We basically give them all of the work that we've put forward, and we pay them to take it. $3,000 usually to publish a paper. They then take the copyright. They then turn around and charge any other researcher $50 to see the paper. All right. The scientist doesn't get paid, and the reviewer doesn't get paid. So you have to ask yourself, who's doing these reviews? If there's no money involved and there's no pricing signal, the people who are doing these reviews are the people who have the most time on their hands and are effectively unemployed. Otherwise, you don't have time for them. If you are busy in the scientific field and you're productive, you're not spending free time on peer review. That's getting done in the bathroom. It's getting done on weekends and nights. It's getting done between meetings. Basically, it's getting done in the most sloppily and inconsistent manner possible. The other thing is in a lot of journals, make reviewers anonymous. Anonymous reviewers, if their name's not going to be on the work, what do they care if they've done spent 5 seconds on it and lobbed it over the fence, right? It just evolves into trolling. People just quickly read something and spend 5 seconds thinking about it and give it a real sloppy review. Oftentimes these things details get equally missed and things get rubber stamped right through the process, right? So you can tell that anything that has this type of incentive system isn't going to produce truth. It's going to produce propaganda, most likely. So it begs the question, why even use a publisher? What is their purpose in this post-Gutenberg internet world that we have? Why do we have some centerpiece there? Are they an arbiter of trust? It doesn't look like it based on the results. So crypto bounty peer reviews change this. They change the incentive model. Instead, the researcher posts a bond or a bounty up on, let's say, LinkedIn. Hey, here's $1,000 in crypto for anyone who can review this in 5 days. And the only contingency is that you got to put your name on it. Everything we do is going to get put public. All communication is going to get hashed and stashed in a blockchain. And as long as you're good with that, we'll give you half up front, half later. There's a host of different ways that you can organize these to accelerate peer review. This has been done once before in sort of a proof of principle, not for a final manuscript, but we've seen one project take this approach, and it worked really well. It was at a Kratom genome project. And they raced through and got a wonderful peer review on the pilot stage of the project with just 0.1 Bitcoin and in 4 days. All right, so people really booked their time over the weekend to get this stuff done, and there's plenty of competent people out there that would be willing to spend extra hours doing that rather than driving Uber or what have you. They would spend their time, given there was an incentive to get a process done using crypto. So we just need to incentivize this appropriately. But in this model, there's really no need for a publisher. There's just a need for a blockchain that can prove and transparently show all the hashes of all the communications to make sure that no one has been altering the data or censoring any of the peer review process. And then a place to put it, and whether that's on Dash Drive or Amazon or Mega, that's somewhat secondary. But the having the incentivization right, and then having the cryptographic proof of it right is what's really critical. So anyway, there's more on this replication crisis as well. So it's one thing that there's a really high retraction rate. The other thing that will frustrate people in any field is that replicating work is you have the stuff that does get through peer review doesn't replicate. Like 50% of the time, 70% of the time, depending on the field, you can't replicate the work. That has what does that say about the peer review process? So if the peer review did have a monetary component to it, you could imagine different grades of peer review that eventually evolve. There'd be people who just do quick and fast ones, and there might even be people who try and reproduce the work, but you got to pay like 20 grand for that type of peer review. And those would get labeled in the literature as being this has been reproduced. Very hard to get a publication out that's just a replication study. If you try and submit a publication to a journal saying, "Hey, I just replicated someone else's results, and I thought it'd be helpful to let the world know that those methods work," those don't publish. They're not considered novel enough, and there's a selection against them. So the whole system could really use an overhaul, and crypto can do it. And there's no better project to do this in the cannabis genome, because these things do tend to get laughed at occasionally in certain journals. And that brings me to this disrupting event. This is Elsevier, which is one of the larger publishing houses, and it's an enormous business. It's $25 billion a year for academic publishing. And it's pretty much rent-seeking on the whole scientific community, because the scientists pay it both ways. They do the work, they pay the journal to publish it, and then they got to buy the journals back as Elsevier runs around and sells this to various libraries throughout the university system. So the only reason this exists is due to copyright, and we don't need copyright anymore with what we have with blockchain. So this process is not censorship resistant, and Dash is. It's not provably fair or transparent, and Dash can be. And it doesn't really incentivize anyone properly, and Dash has that option as well. So we see this kind of crypto bounty peer review as being really critical to drive home the message of this project, and also bring in more discussion points. It's one thing to address the patent issue. You'll bring in a whole list of intellectual property people debating that. And then there is the publishing side of this, which is going to catch headlines. There's the fact that it's genomics that's getting funded through crypto is an entirely another angle. So there's many vectors of capturing news stories with this and getting many more eyeballs thinking about Dash. And particularly the ones that are best funded or more likely to care about these particular topics. So I think it will get Dash name out there more than just a sponsor, and it will get people wanting to interact with Dash because Dash knows how to solve problems. So anyway, why should you fund this? Well, it augments all the existing efforts that you have in the cannabis industry, demonstrates Dash's ability to solve really hard problems in the space, from financing to patent troll mitigation to peer review neutrality to long-lasting resource. And this is a historic event. Having a genome this good will last an extraordinary amount of time and will be highly referenced, and we can bring a lot of eyeballs to the table. And it's particularly, as I mentioned before, it's the people who are interested in this topic are the people that have molecular biology budgets that grows. There are people that have tremendous funding in the cannabis industry. This is a very different angle to advertise Dash to than just getting Facebook clicks. All right, this is taking a different angle of engaging all the KOLs. So this would position Dash as a significant contributor to the history record here, and not just necessarily a conference sponsorship or a booth attendee. It's a very different way to capture mindshare. And with that, thank you. I'd like to encourage everyone to take a look at the actual proposal, and look forward to all your comments.